So welcome, good morning, and you are in the right place. I want you to make sure you have not wandered off into some place you are not. We welcome you this morning and we say good morning to you and welcome to Taking Care of Us, strengthening Black and Brown communities through mental health, equity, and advocacy. Today's presentation by the Office of today's session is presented by the Office of Suicide Prevention in partnership with the Maryland Department of Health, the Black Mental Health Alliance, and the University of Maryland School of Medicine. So again, we thank you. Again, you have not wandered into the right session. This is your time for this. What a moment we are given to host this roundtable and have a frank conversation about the importance of strengthening communities of color, equity, and advocacy. What a moment we have at the last day of Black History Month that we know it, that the last day that we get to usher in some amazing things, we get to leave out with some amazing tidbits, but more importantly, almost a call to action. We have an all-star panel for you today. So I hope you did not come to sleep. This was not that roundtable. This is the roundtable. 3 brilliant Black women who will participate in this discussion with meaningful, honest dialogue, and each in their own right, fearless. So we must take care of us and call systems out that have historically discounted the mental health of Black and Brown people into account. We've got to call them out. Taking care of us through community must look different and be different. And you'll hear about that today. Less pontificating, more action and more advocacy. And so we're excited again for you to join us. The late Congressman John Lewis said, we must be bold, we must be brave, and that if it's not right or not fair, not just, that you have to speak up. It is your right to speak up. It is your privilege to speak up. And if you have something, you must do something. If you see something, you must do something. And then he ended it by saying, never be afraid to make some noise and to get into some good trouble, necessary trouble. And so today, under Dr. Martin's watch, we're going to get in a little good trouble. And we're going to make noise, the noise that will add on the 28 days that they've given us for Black History Month, but noise that'll go right into Women's History Month, and noise that will go into Mental Health Month, and noise that will go on. And so today, be prepared to get in some good trouble. And so I thank you, I welcome you. And just in case, I want you to remind you, you are in the right place. I will turn it over now to my colleague who will facilitate this discussion, and we'll introduce our brilliant panel today for this roundtable discussion. Dr. Martin?
All right, well, thank you so much, Andrea, for that welcome. We have 3 very fine panelists with us, as you mentioned earlier. Dr. Aliya Jones, Executive Medical Director, Behavioral Health with Luminis Health. Stephanie Slowly, with the Maryland Department of Health, and Dr. Rhonda Wilbon, who is also who's also joining us today. I really am excited about this panel discussion and the fact that typically in our communities, mental health is a stigma that often goes without discussion, the necessary discussion. So as we start this panel discussion, I want to address this first question to the entire group. So, of course, today's session is entitled Taking Care of Us. How do you take care of yourselves? And that's to any one of you. How do you practice that self-care?
I'll start first. I think that's a wonderful question to start with. And let's see if I can be honest about how well I do or don't take care of myself. So I have 2 young children, a 5-year-old and a 12-year-old, and a very, busy job. And so I try to make sure that every day before I go to bed, I 100% unplug from everything, from being a mom, from being from being a wife, from being an employee, And I really try to do something for myself every night. So I listen to Audible books before I go to bed. Nothing academic, just purely for pleasure. If it or maybe I watch a show, but that's not really a great way to wind down. So listening to Audible before I go to bed is something that I do. And also when I'm really good, engaging in my spiritual practices, which I think is really important. I mean, that's something I do every Sunday. That's a part of my life. However, having that personal time is something that's really important for me as well. So those are two things that I pretty reliably do.
Wonderful. Dr. Wilbon.
Yes, I think I've learned how to be very intentional about self-care. And so I do self-care every day because I've gotten to the phase in my life where my to-do list never ends. And so I don't wait until the to-do list ends before I take care of myself. So I do things every day to take care of myself. I do a lot of water rituals. So I do spiritual baths with bath salts and oils. I like fire rituals. So I like a fire pit. I like a fireplace. I like those kinds of things. I have lots of candles. But the thing that I do that I think is the most important is I limit my contact with toxic people. I limit my contact with people who I don't have a good aura with, if you will, or a good connection with, people who don't make me feel good about myself. If I have to be involved with people like that, I do what I have to do, but then I pull back and I limit my contact in spaces where I don't feel like I'm supported.
Wonderful. Stephanie, how do you
Yeah.
practice self-care?
I will confess that I need to do better at that. I am a new mom of an 8-month-old, and so sometimes I forget to put me on the list. But I am learning. I've committed for the new year to do better at that. And one of the things I think I do unknowingly I've done is I let everyone go to bed before me, and I sit in silence at times. And I use that time to I have a faith base, so I will pray. I will meditate, I will just breathe, but I just enjoy and appreciate the gift of silence, because sometimes I think there's always so much noise in the world and you just don't know how much oversensitized we are, right? So there's so much sensory actions happening. So I feel like it's been really good to sit in silence. I do want to get to the bath thing that Dr. Wilbon spoke about. So I'm going to try to incorporate that. It's in my Amazon box, but I haven't gotten there. And I think the other thing that I really like to do is listen to music. I feel music is healing from a cultural perspective. You know, I am Afro-Caribbean, so reggae is a really strong thing. The vibrations is good for me. And I do read and I do journal. And I think that is another way to downput my thoughts and not carry the muck of one day into the next, and being appreciative and seeing a new day as a new day. And so those are just some of the ways that I am, and I need to be consistent about that. But those are some of the things I've been doing lately.
Can I just want to take off of that really quickly? I mean, we're talking about mental health and talking about women, talking about Black women and our mental health, and Black women and mothers and women in general. We tend to be so outwardly focused and always taking care of everybody else all the time, whether it's, you know, biological family, extended family, church family, work family. We have so many different families that we're a part of, and we're usually so externally focused. That's oftentimes a missed opportunity for women. You know, I come home and my husband just parks himself in front of the TV, and, you know, he just, you know, he's there, but he's taking care of himself. He's completely unplugged. And I'm cooking dinner and I'm, you know, checking homework, doing projects, you know, making sure everybody's ready for the next day. It's really, really important that we do take that time to take care of ourselves, and that we are intentional about it, like you mentioned, Dr. Wilbon, because if we're not, it's very easy to overlook it, you know, and to be, you know, and to just continue to pour ourselves out, and then we've got nothing to give. And that can certainly be the beginning of the undoing of our mental health, or certainly will interfere with our ability to restore our mental health. So
what I hear you saying, Dr. Jones, is we need to put ourselves on the list.
Yes, on the list. We need to prioritize ourselves. Yes, and it's okay to prioritize yourself. It's important to prioritize yourself. That's not selfish.
Wonderful, wonderful. Dr. Wilbon, suicidal thought plans and attempts are rising among Black and African American young adults, while still lower than the overall U.S. population. What do you believe are the contributing factors to the rise in our young people in terms of being exposed to this and attempting suicide?
Yeah, so I think that there are several factors. One is that we often think of our children and youth as somehow having different experiences than we have as adults. And the reality is, and especially in our community, that all of our experiences are very interconnected. And so what is happening to us is also happening to them. And so although we try to protect them from certain things, we can't afford to think that the things that we do actually creates a bubble for them where they're not exposed. So I do believe that the same things that we are exposed to, like the news, politics, various images of negative Black experiences in the world, teachers perhaps, and they can be Black or white, who may not necessarily be supportive of who they are as Black people. All of those things can be very challenging for our youth. And so we have to make sure that our young people feel that they are important, in spite of the fact that the rest of the world clearly doesn't believe that they are. And we also have to make sure that they believe that they have a voice, that they are seen. And these things are very important because even for adults, we don't always feel those things. So I think that's part of the reason why it is so challenging for us to make sure we help our children, feel those things. And I think that one of the things that we have to do very consistently is we have to create safe spaces for them in spite of the rest of the world, because they go out into the world and they may have these kinds of experiences, but home should be a safe space. We should create safe spaces and opportunities for them to socialize with friends whose families are like-minded, church family members, perhaps people that they may be exposed to in sport teams or different activities and events that they participate in. We have to be very deliberate about making sure that we're more supportive and not just based on class. Often middle-class children have experiences and exposures that other children don't have. And so we have to be more intentional about making sure that children and young people who come from spaces that may not have the same socioeconomic stability as others, that they still get some of those opportunities and experiences to, in spite of whatever else is happening, they have some safe and protected places where there are adults, where there are Black men, where there are, Black women and other Black youth that are creating a sense of wellness around them in spite of what's happening in the rest of the world. And so I think that what we're seeing now is because they feel very unprotected. They don't feel a sense of stability. They see that the adults around them really cannot protect them. And so we have to create a different narrative for them, that in spite of the fact that some of that may very well be true, like we can't always protect them, but we don't want them to experience life as feeling like they're not protected. We should still create something around them so that they still feel that sense of stability, if you will.
Okay, and Dr. Jones or Stephanie, do you guys want to react to that?
You want to go, Dr. Jones?
Sure. So we have a lower death rate. However, our suicide attempt rate is higher in young Black children or minority children than in majority populations. And so this is a very, very significant, and that's different. It wasn't always like that. It's a much more recent phenomenon. Part of the issue around deaths, higher death rate, particularly among our young boys, younger men, is because of the guns and greater access to guns. So it's more, and as we, as a culture and as a people become weaponized like the majority culture does, that challenge in the majority culture around having greater access to guns for their children, that we are going to start experiencing the same thing. Where there are more guns, there are more suicides. And in cultures and in people where there is more a proliferation of guns, you're going to have more suicides. So we have to be much more careful, or at least as careful as everyone else is, with regards to how it is that we store our weapons, and making sure that we're having conversations with our children. And if we have children or young people in our household who have mental health issues, we should not have guns or weapons in the home, because that is dangerous. So that's just something to be mindful. And then around that, creating a safe space and that openness, we also have to make sure that even if we don't have the same values that our children have, that we don't disparage what it is that they think or feel or believe. We look at the suicide rate and suicidal thoughts within the LGBTQ plus population, which is abysmally high, scarily high. If you don't have, if you are not a sexual minority, you might not, and you have a lot of stigma around sexual behaviors and sexual identities, you can pass that on to your children and create an unhealthy environment or create an unsafe space for them as they're trying to figure out their lives and figure out how they feel about things and shut people down. That is also, a big risk factor, I think, that's contributing to the suicidal ideation that it is, or the increase in ideation, that because that your parents are supposed to be your guardians, are supposed to be your safe place. And when they don't validate you, whether they understand or not, when they don't validate how you feel, that makes people feel hopeless. And hopelessness is certainly one of the things that makes people think about, suicide or a way out. Stephanie?
Yeah, I think what Dr. Wilbon and Dr. Jones said is really critical. I think what I wrote down with the question is, protection versus prepare. And I think that we have to model, number one, for our children. And if we take a step back and we look at it, because yes, you have children in your household if you're a parent, but we also are part of a community. I have nieces, I have godkids, I have people that I see at my church. And so as a community, are we modeling for our young people what emotional intelligence looks like, good mental health looks like? Are we modeling for our children how to deal with adversity? Do we even model that when we're driving, we're having road rage in our car, or when we get things that are not happening, or someone has said something that we don't like? Are we just reacting? Kids are sponges and they model what we do. And sometimes what we operate under this thought process of do as I say, but oftentimes children do as I do. And so when we are talking about how are we preparing our children to live in a world that is going to give them necessary adversity, when we talk about how we can live in a world where oftentimes we are discounted and discredited and really discarded at times, our lives are not treated of value or worth. If we're not modeling for our children and preparing them to live in a world where they are being challenged to really have to deal with a lot in a little time. It's things that something came to my mind earlier about how this generation loves social media, but my generation loved the outside. And the reality of me being home before the streetlights is a concept that my nieces and nephews never had. They're on their social media, they're always home. And so that lack of engagement and being outside, or recognizing how to do things, or the lack of safety communities have anymore to even let your children be outside unattended. We have to recognize the world that they live in, and we have to prepare them to live in this world. And we have to have what Dr. Wilbon says is safe spaces, and we have to be conscientious as to what Dr. Jones said in terms of what are we having in our environments that is not creating that safe space? But we have to just prepare them and be aware that their life is not our life. Their experiences are not our experiences, and how they are growing up is not something we relate to. And we have to, as adults, be willing to learn what they're learning, but able to teach them a moral compass to live by, and some real tenets that they can use to go forth and model that in the way that we do things.
And I was just going to add that one thing about social media. That's a big piece. You know, that is one thing that is definitely different, you know, compared to how each of us grew up. And there's, you know, research that, you know, that abounds now. It's coming out more and more and more about the harms and the dangers of social media, particularly for our adolescent girls. And it's hard, you know, to step in and say, turn off your phone, you know, to step in and say, I want to take your phone. You know, but that's what parenting is. You know, it's the hard work of putting up those guardrails and those protective space and creating and truly creating a safe space, because the social media, it comes into your house and it is everywhere that they are. And so it makes what's supposed to be a safe space a very, very unsafe space. So we do have to be very careful about how much our kids are using that. And or young people, children are using that, and how it is that they're using it, and what experiences they're getting from it, and teaching them how to be introspective about what it is that they're receiving, you know, and what are they doing with these inputs, so that they know how to frame them in a proper way that is not harmful, because there are plenty of great ways to use social media, but then there are also very damaging ways to use it as well.
Right. Wonderful, wonderful. And Stephanie, when you're talking, you're using that phrase modeling, that term modeling. So that leads us to our next question, primarily for Dr. Wilbon and for Stephanie. Do you believe that there is a current model that exists that can identify, intervene, and holistically heal generational trauma and violence?
So I am a huge proponent of African cultural values. There are lots of rites of passage programs around. When you look up rites of passage, I mean, there are pockets of rites of passages all over the place, all the way back from the early 1970s, if you will. And so that, I think, is a great model. I think we probably should utilize those more across the board, because what I think happens is people create these pockets of rites of passage programs in a certain community, and it kind of gets locked there. And I think we need to expand some of those really good models, and so that they become national models, because I do think there are some that are very good. And then I think definitely having more men involved in these kinds of programs, but women as well. We get a lot of rites of passage that are geared specifically towards boys, and I get that and understand that, because there's an absence of, you know, for boys, there's often an absence of positive male role models. And so a lot of these rites of passage programs have come along to bring Black men together so that they can mentor Black boys. And I think that that is excellent. But we see now that our girls are starting to have a lot of the same issues and problems that boys have. And so we really have to make sure that, and this is really this is an African value in and of itself, and that is, wherever we pour in, we have to make sure we do that for both genders. So if we're pouring in helping boys on one thing, we have to do the same thing with girls. And if we're pouring in doing things with girls, we have to make sure we do the same thing with boys. And so I get it that people kind of focus on what they feel they have the skill and the expertise to do. But one of the things we should always do, if I'm an expert on working with boys, which I am, I have two young adult sons that are in graduate school right now, and I've mentored a lot of boys. And so that is my thing. But one of the things that I always do is, if I'm helping boys, I connect with women that I know that are working with girls that are helping girls. So, because you don't want this lopsided situation where you've done all these things to help this population, but then they don't have their cohort that match in terms of having the same knowledge and value foundation. So I think we have to make sure we're very deliberate about making sure we pour into both generations. And then the last thing that I'll say, because I'm very interested in hearing what Dr. Jones and Stephanie have to say about this, and that is, I actually have a book called trauma and mental health from African-centered clinical interventions. And it is an edited book that people have said is very good in terms of the focus of it, because basically what we wanted to do with that is we wanted to see what existing models there were to deal with different issues within our community. And then we wanted to critique those models based on African traditions and values. And so I think that that's always important, because there's a lot of African-centered traditional things happening around us. It may not be labeled as so, but if you know what it looks like to have African values, then you can always identify those things. If you know that spirituality is something that is a very important traditional African value, wherever you see spirituality and where you see it happening in a positive way, then you know that that's something that's grounded in, a traditional African value. And the purpose of the book was to help us to begin to learn how to identify these things, whether they were labeled as such or not. And so that's something that I think is very important in terms of the whole modeling piece.
Stephanie, before we come to you, Dr. Wilbon, would you make sure you drop the name of that book in the chat so everybody can look that up, okay?
I sure will. Thank you.
And I'll just make a quick comment before you run to Stephanie, because I know she has a lot of really great things to say on this topic. I'd love to get a copy of the book. And the other thing is that what we know is that studies show is that when it comes to people who are in minority populations or Black populations, other populations, the more connected you are to your culture, the more it's a protective factor.
Yeah.
So that that your own personal culturalization makes a difference and helps to ward off mental health problems, not necessarily, psychoses, right? Because that's irrelevant, but certainly depressions and anxieties and adjustment disorders and oppositional defiant sorts of behaviors, all that sort of conduct disorders, being more grounded in your own cultural perspective and your own cultural background, it makes a difference. So I'm certainly interested in learning more about what you have to say, Dr. Wilbon, about your book, but then also that just really speaks to the importance of doing things to keep our kids connected to our culture. It makes a difference.
Wonderful. Stephanie?
Yes, I also would love a copy of Dr. Wilbon's book, because I definitely am holistically believing in that. I think when we talk about what approaches that we get, we often think about Western philosophy and Western theology in terms of theories of how we incorporate or render mental health treatment. But we understand that as a people that we are culture-based and culture-driven, and that when providers provide services to people, we need to be able to bring that cultural connection to the table. It is what connects us. And I think that what Dr. Wilbon said in terms of rites of passage programs, I was thinking to myself, there's an intersectionality, but I was like, but no, she's correct. Because if you think about like sororities and fraternities that have auxiliary groups and young and youth groups where you have women pouring into young girls and men pouring into young men, that is still rooted in rites of passage. And I think that, if you're thinking, I don't know where Afrocentric rites of passage program is for my child, then you can look at your neighboring, colleges and universities, sororities and fraternities as an example. A lot of different things. If you're saying, well, I believe in Christianity, there are still rites of passage programs that are happening within churches and in other faith-based groups. I think when you're talking about, what are we doing? We have to recognize that the systemic issues that we're seeing happening now have a pathology, and that can be traced back to slavery. And I think that Dr. Wilbon's book probably speaks to this, but really talking about how we really going to first acknowledge that this does not happen. It just didn't occur today or 50 years ago, that it started from us generationally. How are we reconciling those things? And then how are we really tying our culture and embedding it into the way that we render treatment and talk about what's important. And I don't think we tell those stories. If you're like my grandmother, who made me sit down and listen to her stories of growing up and said, you need to know this. And I thought when I was a kid, hey, this is just annoying and I don't want to hear these conversations, I want to go play, no, she was teaching me because she wanted me to know that I came from a strong lineage. It wasn't until I graduated and I told her I was going to school for social work, she said, your grandmother went to school for social work. And recognizing that I wasn't doing anything new over the sun, I was a part product of somebody who believed in the service of others, who believed in caring for other people. And sometimes we don't do enough of that. And to what Dr. Jones had said previously about social media, sometimes it saturates our households, and it takes away the time that we would have done to embed those stories, those traditions, those legacy conversations that need to happen, to say, I am a descendant of a woman who built her own business after raising 7 kids on her own. Like, that's where I come from. And that's why I have to lead my life differently. We look at from a cultural perspective, we believe that our ancestors give us strength, they give us power, they give us purpose. And if we're not teaching it to our young, then they go up purposeless. They don't know, what are they anchoring themselves to? And so I think we have to really utilize our own stories, but then also use these rites of passage programs, which could be different, youth groups, but it teaches them to ground themselves in something that is bigger than them, whether it is your faith, whether it is your ancestry, whether it's your spirituality, but something else governs you besides you coming into the world. And also you have a service to somebody else, because what happens in African-centric culture is that we know that we're not doing it for us, but for the betterment of somebody else. Yeah. And so it doesn't just tell you, hey, I need to focus on me and it's about me. That is a very Eurocentric thought process. We are a collective people. We need to make sure that the whole village is good in order for us to be good. And so we need to make sure that we're continuing to have those conversations, teach those proverbs, teach those parables, so that our generations ahead of us will still be very concerned about us as we age and grow older and need the collective to think about us.
And I would add to that particularly now, right, when people want to stop teaching our history,
correct,
want to stop teaching our culture, want to stop teaching, showing the strength, that it took, that it takes, yes, for us to thrive in an environment that is oftentimes very hostile. And I think that, depending upon, it's not even a demography thing, right? Because you have an upper demographic that wants to say, or an upper SES that wants to say, well, where everybody's supposed to be the same, and there's this utopian idea where race doesn't matter. Or even if you have a lower SES where we say, well, I don't want to focus on that, I want to be just like everybody else. Well, the reality is that everybody's different, and our difference is good. Our difference it protects us. Our difference makes us stronger. And we need to celebrate those differences, and we need to make sure that our children understand, the legacy of our people, the bad and the good, because really, the more you know about the bad, the more you appreciate, the good, and how strong we had to have been in order to have endured what it is that our forefathers had to endure, and the things that we continue to have to endure to this day. So it's particularly important more now than ever before.
Yeah, I agree with you, Dr. Jones. I just hear, I feel like sometimes simulation is almost a pathway to conformity. And so you have to recognize that if you embrace your differences and you embrace your uniqueness, not even your differences, what makes you uniquely you, even within Black culture, we are different. And I think that we have to be really concretely aware of who we are individually. And although we are a part of a collective, it takes a lot of individuals to make up that collective. And celebrating, appreciating, and honoring what our unique attributes brings to our collective really makes the contexture more rich and more prosperous. And I think sometimes we are so desiring to blend in that we have not taught ourselves that this is very much as important to stand out. It wasn't just one prolific leader of Black History Month that made us great. It was many people shining their own unique lights, making their own inroads in their different areas to make us great. And what I bring to the table is not what you bring to the table, is not what Dr. Wilbon brings to the table, or even Dr. Martin brings to the table, but we need to celebrate the uniqueness of that and also foster a part that we do not want to just be a part. We want to stand out, because we are set apart for a reason, not because we're Black and woman or Black and man, but because we are Stephanie, Aliya, Rhonda. We are different people, and we are given purposes for being here. And what is your purpose actualized is why you're here. And if we are not celebrating and we're not calling out our uniqueness, and we're only trying to teach and trying to suppress or give everyone this ability of assimilation, then we're going to miss the mark, and we're going to miss the richness that comes from individuals stepping out into their own light. It's just what I felt from what you said.
Okay, wonderful discussion. This is so rich. So the next question is for the group as a whole. How do we connect individuals with emotional healthcare resources such as psychoeducation, classes, therapists, psychiatrists, etc., in order to promote healing, training, and education with the advancement to advocacy? And that's for the group.
I can start if that's okay.
Yeah.
I think, we have to recognize that we belong at the table, right? And I think that we need to be conscientious that those resources are out there for us. Sometimes it doesn't feel like those things belong to us, or that that some psychologist or therapist looks different. Just a small anecdote today, early this morning, I was dropping my car off to be serviced, and the young man that was giving me a ride back to my home when the shuttle was talking, and I said to him, well, I'm a clinical therapist and I've done this in the past and this is what I've done. And he was like, you've done therapy? And I was like, yes. And I was like, well, what did you expect me to look like? And he kind of went into this whole idea, and we start talking about mental health. This is a young man, 21 years old, saying, my mother's pushing me to go to therapy, but I just don't know. And I said, well, let's talk through why you feel you don't want to go to therapy. And we talked through it. And before we left, he said, I'm going to look into it. But I think it's that idea that sometimes people that look like us, clinicians, people who have mental health backgrounds, are among you every single day, and we don't necessarily talk about what it is and who we are. And how do you connect those things is to normalize it. Number one, you have to normalize that it's there and everywhere. Now, if you're talking about access, there's not many of us in comparison to the majority, but we are out there. And I think it's important to have the conversation of, how do you connect that work to do it? And when we talk about advocacy, that is the first right of mental health. When you are a clinician or you're sitting in that room, you're advocating for that patient. You can scale that up. I work at the public behavioral health system. I work for BHA, and my job is to advocate for the state of Maryland's behavioral and mental health. That is what I'm called to do. And I think that when we are talking about what activism looks like, is that when we are talking about the adversities and the struggles and the negatives that Dr. Jones talked about in her previous comment, and we talk about that, we have to also talk about the mental anguish that comes with that, the weight that carries with us, the emotional toll that takes on us. And if we're talking about that, then as clinicians in the field, professionals, government workers, we have to talk about how we can address all the contextures of that. As we see negative images, we are feeling them. And how are we making sure that we not only make the policies right, but we make the people whole that have experienced those things?
Yeah, I'll just add to someone just made a comment in the chat box. What does it also look like? Thank you, Stephanie. It also looks like supporting organizations like the Black Mental Health Alliance. I have used the Black Mental Health Alliance as a resource when I've been looking for providers of color, for people for whom that's important. And Andrea and her predecessors have never let me down in terms of getting people connected. However, organizations like that, they have needs, right? And so we have to put our money where our mouth is, and we have to provide financial resources and supports, and really come out and support when organizations like the Black Mental Health Alliance have call to actions like this. We do need to support them, because they are consistently and have historically consistently been focused on the needs of mental health care, support, and services advocacy for the Black community for very, very many years. I have no idea how they've survived as long as they have, to be quite honest with you. But that should not be a question. There should not be a threat to their existence because of lack of support from the community. We need to change that.
Thank you, Dr. Jones. Dr. Wilbon? I think you're on mute. We can't, just pause 1 second. We can't hear you. No?
No.
Okay. All right. We'll give you an opportunity, Dr. Wilbon, to see what's going on with your audio. I'm going to move on to the next question.
So
Go
I'll
ahead,
just say
Dr.
one
Jones.
more thing. I'll just say that if you're looking for resources, and you want to talk to Andrea or somebody from her team, I think she said that they have a locator on their website. So use their website as a locator of resources. Another resource that I use very commonly is the Psychology Today. Everybody uses that. That's a great resource to help people get connected to providers, and the providers there can let you know about their ethnicity, and if that's a focus that they can use in treatment, and that's for therapists, not necessarily for psychiatrists.
Yeah.
You can use the Maryland Psychiatric Association has resources as well for psychiatrists. Now they are just starting to note what the ethnicity of the provider is. It's not data that they've historically collected. However, in their efforts to try to make sure that they're closing and addressing equity issues, that's become something that they're starting to ask the psychiatrists to self-identify. So there are lots of resources out there.
Okay.
I agree with all of those things. If I could just add, Dr. Martin, with what Dr. Jones is saying, I think, yes, I was just about to say therapy for Black girls is another really good resource, and therapy for Black men is another resource.
Yes.
And then someone noted Headway is another one. And I think that even as you are finding ones that look like you still have to shop around for the right person. I want you to think of it like dating. I want you to think about it like finding that right person that meets your needs and really can address what you have. And so every provider is different. They bring a different process to the system or to the work that they do, but you can find the right person that is in alignment with what you are and what you desire. And I think that is a really good way to do that.
And then we still can't hear you. No.
You know what, Dr. Wilbon, drop your response in the chat. I'm going to read it. Dr. Jones, you can go ahead. Dr. Wilbon, good.
Maybe she'll probably come back in. Yeah. The other thing is other organizations as well. So the National Alliance for Mental Illness is a wonderful organization that's also always been a great support for me when I've needed to get somebody connected. And they are they might be national, but I know that, well, they're definitely national. I was thinking international. No, they're definitely national. And no matter what state you're in, if you're trying to get somebody to connect to resources, if you connect them to NAMI will get them connected to resources. And then also another local advocacy organization, the Mental Health Association of Maryland. There's, lots of really great advocacy in our state. And we're very, very fortunate for that they really do try to address all of the needs for all of the communities that are served and not just any one particular community.
All right. I see that Dr. Wilbon's joined us.
Can you all hear me again now?
I can hear
Yes. Welcome back.
I had to log out and come back in. And I think you're right at the place where I want to actually say this. So if you all saw when I went off camera and then when I came back on, I was muted. But this story to me is amazing as it relates to Black mental health professionals. And I know we're talking about that right now. I had a huge event at my house this past weekend where I was training Black social workers on African-centered practices. We were in circle and all of this. And I have a little teeny Yorkie. This was his first time being exposed to my work, although I've had him for 8 years and I've done this work way before I had him. But to make a long story short, people were in a lot of pain, and I'm talking about professional social workers. And so there was a lot of crying. There was a lot of healing that was going on. My dog literally went around the circle and sat in front of every single person that cried.
Oh, wow.
And at the end of, we did several rounds, but this particular round, at the end of that round, he then started to gag, and I picked him up and took him outside of the circle. And then he vomited all of this white foam. And he's been doing this ever since this circle. He literally absorbed the toxic energy that people had. And it's been amazing. He has been the best co-facilitator I've ever had. Everybody in the group saw everything that he did to take care of the group. And so I'm saying that because I believe that when we train dogs to be emotional support animals, all of these things are very important. A lot of the non-traditional things that we don't know if we should use, or we don't know what people think about it, we have to honor what we just know in our gut and in our instinct and our intuition. Those things go a huge, long way in terms of helping to get our people back to where we need to be in terms of being whole. And I think one of the most devastating things that has happened to us is to be taught in this society that the things that we value and believe is somehow wrong, and it is something wrong with it. It's demonic, it's voodoo, it's, you know, and a lot of these practices are the very things that can really help us. And you can be Christian and have different diverse spiritual practices. You can do all of these things. And so I just wanted to offer that to the group because I'm still kind of dealing with this issue. So I had to go because I heard him gagging, and so I had to go and take care of him. So I hope that he's okay now. But if I go off the screen again, it is because of that. But I'm taking care of my co-facilitator in this whole healing process.
No, Dr. Wilbon, I think that what you just brought to light is really, really, really powerful. I think that we don't acknowledge the fact that there are many modalities that can help and support in treating people who are dealing with crisis, and that, you know, the utilization of animals has been noted to be a really strong modality. I have my own emotional support animal. I do not use him in any treatment besides my own, but I will attest to the fact that, and he's a Morkie, so he's a Yorkie mix. I will attest to the fact that that is a true thing. And when I was going through my own grief journey, that level of support and comfort during the pandemic, when we were sitting in the house and all I had really was my dog, because I couldn't see anybody, not even my own family, that level of support helps. And I think that we have to recognize that we're dealing with a huge compounding problem. When we're talking about people who are having suicidal ideations and people who are feeling like they are at their wits' end and they're just helpless and hopeless, what could we use? What should we not use to make sure that we're reaching everyone? And the answer is everything. We cannot leave anything on the table. We're dealing with a huge issue with a community that has always been left out or not considered as an area of treatment. And if we are not going to really be innovative and really thoughtful and intentional about how we meet to those needs, then what are we all doing? And I think that that is a really wonderful thing. And I think it brings up another thing that you pointed out, that you were not working with people who are in need, that you were working with people who are helping other people. And the space that they hold, my goodness, the space that they hold to help usher in peace, calm, healing in other lives, all while being broken and needing healing for themselves, to me, it's a powerful thing that you're doing. And I applaud you. And I think that is a wonderful thing. It makes me emotional thinking about that, because I think we don't understand. I think Dr. Jones started off saying, as mothers, we give out, but as clinicians of color, we give out so much that we don't even know that we're holding things that we haven't let out. And although your puppy's able to get it out, sometimes we need that same space to get it out too. And I think we cannot discount that when we're talking about how do we heal as a community, how do we outreach into the community, how do we model for the community what we're doing. So what you're doing is just powerful. And I do hope your puppy's okay, but I really wanted to applaud you for that work.
Thank you so much. And I want to add that most universities are allowing people to bring emotional support dogs to school now. They're living in the dormitories. Often in our community, we will say things like, well, that's a white girl thing to do. No, Black girls can benefit from emotional support dogs too. Black boys can benefit from emotional support animals, dogs, or whatever too. So don't be so quick to say that something, oh, that's what those people over there do. No, we have had relationship with our pets. We are pet lovers. And I know now more and more our young people are having pets. Just the ideal of having a pet to take care of often gives a person an incentive to want to live, an incentive to be, to be available in life. And so these kinds of things are valuable and important. And so I don't think we should dismiss them as something that is not useful. All of these things definitely are useful.
Wonderful, wonderful. So let's move on with the next question. Again, this question is posed to the whole group, and we're going to pivot to workforce development. Black and African American help seekers make up a very small behavioral health provider workforce. How do you think this factor affects the experience of the community?
Well, I think that, you know, look, piggybacking off of something Stephanie said, I think it makes people think that mental health care, behavioral health care is not for Black people, when we know that that's not the case. You know, but you oftentimes, if you don't see yourself in an environment, you automatically assume that you don't belong there. And the flip side is when other people don't see you in an environment, they think you don't belong there either. So it can kind of go either way. But I think that is that creates a challenge for us. And oftentimes, you know, when there's someone who has an erroneous thought about mental health or behavioral health or depression or suicide, those thoughts are allowed to get propagated within our community when you don't have anybody who can really give the full counsel, you know, about these particular conditions or what someone might be struggling with, or be able to provide the empathy and compassion and support that people need. So it's a challenge, I think, on many different dimensions when we don't have enough of us in this space. And that's why many more of us need to be in this space, and we need to encourage our children, you know, to go into these spaces, into these behavioral healthcare spaces. And that's, the stigma is real there too, right? I remember, you know, when I was a medical student, my father didn't want me to be a psychiatrist. He's like, you can be anything else, just don't be a psychiatrist. In essence, is basically what he was saying, right? When I was going through, you know, my training, on all my different rotations, they were like, why are you going into psychiatry? You're such a good doctor. Like, well, I mean, don't people who have mental health issues need to have good doctors too? You know, there was so much, you know, negativity that I faced, very little support to go into this space. It was because I wanted to be in this space, and because I felt that this was my calling, that I persisted, because there was nobody else that was encouraging me to do this work. So we have to make sure that we support people who are doing this work, and we support our children and make this, you know, a desirable thing for people to do, because you want somebody who's going to be there, who's going to look like you, but they're not going to be there if you don't value them. We're not going to be there. Dr. Wilbon.
Great.
No, I was just going to say that, and right now is such a great time to be innovative in this space, because more and more the larger society is realizing that they need to invest more in mental health, because of all of the gun violence and a lot of the issues that's happening in the larger community. And so I think that we should take as much advantage of this as possible, creating educational programs to help recruit young people as early as 7th grade, as early as 6th grade, start talking to the young people about the various careers in mental health. These pipeline programs, they do these in the STEM. We need to do this in mental health as well, so that we start educating young people, you know, from 6th grade on, around careers and specializations in mental health. I think that will go a long way in terms of helping to deal with some of the issue around the fact that there aren't a lot of us. And then also, because the other thing that happens, and I'm sure Dr. Jones and Stephanie can attest to this, when you are working in white populations and you're one of only one, you end up dealing with a lot of racism and a lot of issues from patients and as well as your colleagues. And so we need to have larger numbers just to even support each other in those spaces, but also because, you know, our population, our communities need to have more of us available to them so that they can have more choices. And I do think that it will help them trust, you know, mental health more when they see more of us involved in providing services, you know, mental health services.
I completely agree with Dr. Wilbon and what Dr. Jones has stated, and it's true. When I decided to go into the field of social work, my mother was very adamant and said, "You don't take babies out the home?" And I said, "No, I'm not taking anybody's children out any home. That's not what I'm here to do." And I wanted to be a clinician. I wanted to work with people. I told her I wanted to fix families because mine was broken. That's what I told her. And I said that very honestly, but it was a It came out of a child who dealt with adverse childhood experiences. And I had dealt with a lot, and I wanted to help other communities see something different. I tell people my first profession, if y'all ever introduce me, I'm always going to say I'm a social worker first. I'm a proud social worker. I don't care what role I sit in. My profession is social work. So every client looks different. Right now, my client is the state of Maryland, but I've had individual clients. I've had older adults that were clients. I've had individuals in a clinical room. Everywhere I go, I'm looking at people like, who am I serving and how can I serve? And I think that what Dr. Wilbon said is correct. We need to make mental health something that is attainable for everyone at an early age. When I was in high school and college and talking about this field, a lot of my friends looked at me like I had two heads, like, you really care to talk about people's problems all day? And I said, yes, I do. And I think it's not only that, but it's about service. And I also feel there's a couple of things that I think we need to do if we really want to attract people. One, the average lifespan of people in this profession, not psychologists excluded, talking about like lay workers, social workers and counselors, is 2 to 5 years. The burnout is exorbitant. You have to be able to create a space where people feel like they can have longevity in their field, which means organizations need to support the workers that are really the backbone of their organizations and institutions. And additionally, we need to make it easy to attain. It took me literally 7 years just to get my master's degree, and an additional almost 2 years to get my license in the state of Maryland. It's a long time. Like, I am dedicated like a doctor, but I'm not getting doctor rates at all. And so I think we need to consider that. And I think Dr. Jones would even attest that on the spectrum of what a psychiatrist gets paid as opposed to an internalist or an anesthesiologist, it's not equitable. And so we also have to think about livelihood and think about how do we ensure that the workforce can really be shored up and live. Student loans is a real thing. It's on the Supreme Court right now. We're praying that that happens in the right way, but a lot of people are considering that when they're talking about, is this the field for me? I may have the passion, but I may not have the budget for it. And so we have to think about all of those things.
I mean, I think that that's very, very true. And I think that that's because, I think that comes down to stigma, right?
Mm-hmm.
And how much do medical institutions, and I mean the big M, and how much do they value behavioral health care, mental health care? How much is it financially? What are you really doing? You know, can anybody can do that, and therefore they don't pay you anything to do it, you know, but anybody can't do it. You know, everybody can't do it. Certainly can't do it well, but that's a whole quality issue. We're not having that conversation today, but, but, you know, but yes, I completely agree about the challenges with regards to how people are financially incented to do or to not do this work.
Excellent discussion on that question. Moving right along, another question primarily for the group. How can, and I think we've touched on this a little bit throughout the discussion here. How can we work to build trust and reduce the stigma surrounding seeking mental health care services?
I can start if that's okay with the group.
Yes.
I think one thing we have to do is normalize it. You know, I think just as well as Dr. Jones gave her own witness about how everyone tried to deter her from the pathway of helping people in the field, I think it's the same way of the stigma of saying that we are going to seek help as a way of not being crazy. The equation is you're going because something is wrong with you. You're going because you are crazy, or, you know, you can't be helped, or you're if my father would say, you're a madman. Like, it's that thought process of like, something has to be extremely wrong, or something has to be totally out of this concern, and you cannot do that. And some people who are very religious may say you don't have a strong faith base in order for you to be seeking these type of services. And I think we have to tear down those internalized cultural barriers that we see within our own communities and say you can go to a therapist like you go to the dentist, or you can go to a therapist like you go to a doctor. I think we have to also be able to tell our own stories about that when we sought help and when we went to go to our own therapist, and share that, just like we want to share the legacies of our family members, why we value our mental health, why we value self-care, to the first question you gave us, Dr. Martin. How do we take care of ourselves? my mental health is a part of my self-care. I have my therapist who I see once a week, and that's just a standing appointment that we have. It's not that something is wrong, but I don't want something to be wrong before I go. I don't want to have those things. And when things are harder and when I have to deal with other things such as postpartum, I had my therapist in place. I wasn't seeking someone. I just increased my services. And so I think sometimes we think that maintenance care is not a thing, but we do preventative care in every other facet of healthcare. Why not in behavioral health? Why not in mental health? And we have to stop treating it as it's a different thing. Like we can't talk about equity as a different thing. Like we should not talk about the impact of racism as a different thing. We are one body living one experience. And if I need to utilize my mental health services today and my medical services tomorrow, then that is what I'm going to do. Because if I don't do it, then I'm going to be really deteriorated, and then there will be a problem. And it's going to take more to bring me back to a place of wholeness. So I think that that's where we really want to start, and be honest about your mental health care. We never get ashamed to tell somebody that we're going to get a colonoscopy, which to me is way more invasive than sitting down talking to somebody. Just saying, I've heard many people tell me about their colonoscopy, which is great. Congratulations, and please get screened. But I'm going to a therapist, and I feel like sometimes we don't do that. So I think we need to keep that in mind, and we need to normalize the conversation as we would any other medical procedure. But I'll turn it over to my other panelists.
I think maybe we should also start marketing ourselves just slightly differently, because one of the things that I'm seeing more and more is, people like the ideal of a coach. So we have a lot of non-trained folks now coaching people and doing a lot of things really that are in our lane. And so I'm not beyond dropping my title and bringing, still bringing the same expertise and knowledge and everything to the space. And so maybe some of it is how we market ourselves to people. And I mean, we can say that we're licensed clinicians, but we're like coaches. Like we do these things that coaches do. I mean, we do these things that your beautician and your barber does, because that's where Black people purge. They purge at the beauty shop, the barber shop, the bar. And now, to these coaches that are coming along, providing, life coaches and things. And so I think that maybe we just have to shift gears a little bit in terms of how we market ourselves and market the services that we offer and provide. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think that we still say who we are, but then in terms of what we do and what we do that looks like what some of these other people are doing, because literally they are doing a lot of things that trained mental health professionals, trained clinicians are doing. And even now there's a whole different group of medical professionals that are also prescribing medication now. And Dr. Jones knows more about that, I'm sure, than I do. But it seems to me that more paraprofessional type people are moving into spaces doing the very same work that, we've been trained to do. And I think that we have to pivot a little bit and figure out how to market ourselves and package ourselves in some different kind of ways.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And I think my reflection on that is that people have different needs, right? So personally, as someone who's also been in psychotherapy, I feel that everybody should have experience being in psychotherapy. We could all use some couch time, is what I always say. We could all, we really, really could, because life is a lot. However, we all have different needs. And so there are some people who have, we have, diagnoses are on a spectrum: mild, moderate, severe depression, so mild, moderate, severe mood disorder, mild, moderate, severe substance use disorder. And for the less licensed or the non-licensed person, they should be and probably can very well manage someone who's on the mild to non-diagnostic part of the continuum and spectrum. However, there's always going to be people who are on the higher end of the spectrum who need that trained clinician from whatever discipline it is that we represent. I think that we need to continue to do a better job, or we need to do a better job doing outreach to people who are filling in the gaps. So talking to our pastorate groups, the people come to pastors and spiritual advisors with all manner of challenge or problem that they can't handle, and they don't know what to do, and they want our help. So I think we need to do a better job of doing outreach to people who are filling in the gap to say, hey, when someone comes to you, I'm here to help you and help you to do that work. So doing that partnership, I think that working I like what we're doing now with integrated healthcare, where you have more mental health services being provided in primary care environments. That helps people to see their mental health care just like any other general medical condition, because they should. So continuing to grow that modality, I think, is going to be really, really important. I really do love what I'm seeing with our young people and how much more open they are about mental health than their parents are and their grandparents are. I think that is going, I think the stigma, I think we're probably going to grow out of stigma as this younger generation grows up and, the rest of us leave the scene. They don't have the same issues that we have around if somebody doesn't feel good, then they should go see a therapist, or they're on medication. They don't really care about stuff like that. Their parents care about stuff like that. So I do believe for the future, as we age out and they age in, the stigma issue will be less of a problem. But in the meantime, the biggest way to combat stigma is education. And we need to provide as many opportunities as we can to keep educating people.
I think that that's a really good point you make, Dr. Jones. And I think one of the things that goes back to that, I think a previous question that we had earlier about like allowing our children to teach us. And if they are open and are expressive and are accepting of therapy, that if your child is coming to you and stating, hey, I think I need mental health therapy, then we don't just say, well, you just want attention, or we ain't got time for that, or whatever the immediate no could be. Ask them why, go with them, learn. And
I don't want anybody in my business.
I don't want anybody in my business. That's a big one. And what's in my house
goes on in this house stays
in my house. Exactly. And we want to, and I think we need to recognize that it still can stay in your house because the clinician can't tell you your business. So it's not like they're going around telling anybody what's happening anyway. I promise you that. So I think it's important that the young can teach the old. And I think that that's why it's a collective, it's a village, right? And we need to let the young have voice, have opportunities to teach us the way, because they might know. And yes, they know more than just how to help you set up your cell phone. They might know how to get you to some mental health services. And I think that we need to create that open dialogue where kids are not only feeling heard, but are also being able to lead when they have good thought processes or when they have good ideas, and getting you to mental health may be a really good thing. I can't tell you how many times I've seen children usher families into therapy, and that's a good thing. And so how do we just allow that voice to happen? And that also can aid in some of that reduction. If they don't feel discredited and they feel heard, then that also could be a way of not only having one generation have help, but it could be multi-generational intervention. So I think it could be a good thing. So I just wanted to add that.
Wonderful, wonderful. And as we are coming up on about 24 minutes left in this discussion that has flown by, I'm doing a cursory scan of the chat, and there seems to be quite a bit of support about the emotional support from a pet. So that's great. One interesting comment here from Linda Brown. STEM is the focus with national organizations doesn't seem to consider the professions of mental health or social work. We need to get 7th graders exposed to mental health and social work early on. I think that's a great point. And I think there was one more here from Kelsey Reese that I saw. It takes a lot of time as well to work through trauma and learn to navigate these systems that have also been sources of trauma. That we working, being a trained professional also teaches us how to code switch and present ourselves differently to work towards destigmatization. Yeah, so we're having some good comments showing up in the chat.
There's some questions in the Q&A.
Yeah, don't forget the Q&A. Okay, let's go over there. Okay, so Renee Wilson, so how do we reach them when some of our children have safer spaces in the streets with their peers than they do in their homes with primary caregivers? That's a great point. Does anyone want to address that, by the way?
I think that a lot of work with the schools, and I really do like what's happening now with mental health services it being almost kind of being expected that kids can get mental health services at schools, because you talk to kids at school, that means you can talk to their parents, and it gives you an opportunity to provide forum to talk to parents about how to talk to their children, about how do you parent in a way that's healthy for your child from a social, emotional, developmental perspective. It makes school the place to have those sorts of conversations, so you don't have to go off to the therapist's office or be called into therapy in order to have healthy conversations about how do we talk to our children, how do we create a safe space for them. Parenting is not natural. It's like everybody has their own way of doing it, right? And everybody's way of doing it isn't informed by, the best way to do it. We need to be taught, how to have certain types of conversations. It doesn't necessarily come natural for most people about how to do this sort of work, to create these sort of spaces. We parent the way we were parented, and most of us were not parented in a space that said, I want to hear everything that's on your mind. I want to, I'm open, I'm receptive, I'm going to listen, I'm not going to punish you, and so parents have to learn how to do that sort of stuff. So I think working with the schools is going to be important, an important way to have those sort of conversations.
Right. I think you touched on a couple of other items here in the Q&A. So I'm going to pivot back to our questions here. And this is for the group. How do you believe that cultural competency among clinicians factors into the community seeking and staying in care?
So I'll just say that, certainly the studies have shown that there's increased engagement when you have people who are from the same cultural background working together. At least for the care seeking perspective, it doesn't work that way in research, which is different, because when you talk about internalized racism and when you have, scientists that look like you might not trust them as much as of a scientist who's a white scientist or anything else other than Black. But from a clinical perspective, there is increased engagement when you have when you're in treatment with someone who looks like you. And I think that it speaks to the importance of having that cultural understanding, sharing that same cultural perspective, not having to explain yourself all the time about what life is like for you. But on the flip side, the way around that is that providers have to do a better job of demonstrating something that Stephanie talks a lot about, which is cultural humility. And understanding that you don't know everything that you might think that you know. Everybody's experience is not like yours, and doing more asking of questions and trying to really understand and truly putting yourself in the seat of the other person, truly walking in their shoes. You don't necessarily know that if you don't share a cultural background, or there's a little bit more distance, and you've got to work harder to close that distance. But it certainly does make a difference in making people feel invited and welcomed into care. And to stay into care, because people will come, but they won't necessarily stay if they don't feel that connection with their provider.
I do a cultural humility workshop, actually, for CEUs. Several different organizations have asked me to do it for them. And one of the things as I've gotten older that I'm now starting to be more concerned about and committed to, and that is actually helping white people and training white people, because the reality is, until our numbers are where they need to be, we have to do what we can to help them so that they will be more culturally competent. And I know a lot of people don't want to spend their time working in those spaces. They would much rather work with our community. And I think we have to do both. And I know that's not everybody's cup of tea. For a long time, it was not mine at all, but I'm just beginning to realize that if I really want to help us, right, exactly. If I want to help us, we have no choice. And I would much rather, I feel more comfortable sending somebody to a white person that I know I've trained to be culturally, for cultural humility, than someone that I have not. And so if we're out there doing that kind of work in the community, it's going to catch on somewhere. It's not going to catch on with everybody, but there will be some people that will will embrace it. And that's a whole nother space where we can be doing a lot more work.
And I would say there's a lot of interest in that space, because I think that there are so many people who want to do good, you know, and who want to know how to do good. You know, I'm bowled over by how many practitioners that are not Black that want to learn more about how to engage minority communities, how to not be offensive, how to not traumatize, how to deal with the stuff that's happening, you know, with the police brutality issues that come up, or the murders, you know, of our people by police, and how that impacts us. And how to interact with people when these sorts of things happen. There are many people out there who want to know how to do this work. And we have to make sure that there are people like you, Dr. Wilbon, who are training people and doing this work. And Stephanie, you do a lot of this sort of work as well. It's critically important. There's never going to be enough of us, not anytime soon. Maybe sometime down the road, but we got a problem now, and we got to deal with it now with the foot soldiers that we have on the ground right now. And they don't all look like us.
Yeah, I totally agree with Dr. Jones and Dr. Wilbon, and the fact that you're doing this training in that space is really transformative, because that's where it starts. I don't think anyone wakes up and desires to not have cultural competency or wants to exercise cultural humility, but I think we are living in a system that is actively trying to eradicate history. And when we are talking about how do you address or treat people with different cultural perspectives and cultural experiences, if we are not going from the place of understanding and a desire to learn and be taught, then we are always going to be behind the 8 ball. And I think that, you know, it's going to take all of us to eradicate and dismantle systems that have historically kept us oppressed and historically has kept us out. And if we do not include everyone who wants and desires to see things better, then we're leaving a lot of village people off the table. I think also another part of that is recognizing that just because I look like you doesn't mean that I have the same cultural experience as you. And so I need to understand that what I feel as an Afro-Caribbean woman may be a different lived experience if both my parents grew up here in the United States. I was raised primarily by a man who lived in Jamaica, and his viewpoint and how he raised me, it affects the trajectory of where I went in my life, versus if I had both my parents who grew up and lived here. Geographical location matters in terms of if I grew up in the South or in the North, if I grew up on the East Coast or the West Coast. I think it's also important to understand that different ethnicities, different cultures, different people that come from the diaspora have different lived experience. Some may be similar, but they are very nuanced. And so we need to recognize that if we are talking about the intersectionality of how to treat individuals, then we need to treat them as individuals. And that level of humility really requires, even as a Black clinician, that you are in a posture, in a state of humility, and a posture, in a state of understanding, but mostly in a posture, state of wanting to learn and being taught by every individual that is coming to you and saying to you, this is my lived experience, and not blank washing and say, well, we all as Black people, we do this, because we all don't do that. Some people put sugar in their grits, some people put butter and some people put butter in their grits. Two different people. I'm a butter person. Don't ask me for no sugar grits. But the point is, we all have to know that our lived experiences are different. And I can't assume everybody wants their grits the same way, or even if they eat grits. And I use that analogy because it's funny, but it's true. We cannot just assume we all know what everybody is living with, experiencing. And if we are really committed to making these great inroads and healing our community, then we need to make sure that that happens.
Yeah, I think of it like the person, like a person who deals with people who have experienced trauma. You know, so we look at, you know, if you have a woman who has been traumatized, you might want to be careful about putting her in front of a man, because that has meaning for her. You know, that, or it may have meaning for her. We have to be sensitive. Is she comfortable? Is she going to share? Is she going to feel safe in that space? And it's like, okay, well, there's that's similar to, you know, working across different demographies, working with different ethnicities. You know, are they going to feel comfortable? You know, and we don't hold. When you look at, you know, someone who's been through something, it's like they have permission. Okay, well, I understand why they might be uncomfortable seeing a man. Well, you should also understand why somebody who doesn't look like you might not feel comfortable talking to you, you know? So it's not personal to you. It's about what it is that person needs. So
isn't that like working in humility though, is that you don't take it personally, right? Isn't that a posture of humility when you say to yourself, this is not about me. If a client rejects Stephanie, that's because maybe I am not giving that person what they need. And if I'm in concern about the betterment of somebody else, then I'd rather you go get what you need from where you need it versus saying you rejected me as an individual. And I think that that's the posture of humility that we're talking about. And sometimes we become so person-centric. It's about us. It's about, who we are. And I think that that is not the way it goes. It's about serving somebody else. And I need to be outwardly focused, not inwardly focused. I go to my own therapy for my own needs. But if I'm serving somebody, I need to be in this posture of saying, what is it to better serve you, Aliya? How can I better help you? And if I am not your cup of tea, let me help you find that tea that makes sense for you. And I think that that is where sometimes we also lose the mark, that we take it so personally because we are the ones giving the service. But it's not personal. It's really about who needs the help and where can we get them the best help. And if that's what we're trying to do, then the whole community is better for it.
Agreed.
So Dr. Wilbon, you're typing an answer in the Q&A for a question I was about to read because it's really a good one. Can you talk about, this from Danielle Haskin, can you talk about tips to having a conversation with the community that addresses the poor outcomes that are higher in the Black community without leading with all of the negative data? I find myself starting the conversation indicating that it is not race that leads to the poor outcomes, but racism. I am careful that I don't plant the seed that our community has the highest rates of obesity, diabetes, and mortality. Oops, it just jumped off my screen here. Where's the rest of it?
I'm so sorry. And that's because I posted an answer.
Okay, all right.
I still want to respond to it though.
Yeah, a mortality that can be self-defeating, hearing all the data up front, but I want to include the data for awareness. Dr. Wilbon.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's so easy to start everything on the positive end. I mean, just because we're trained to address problems doesn't mean we have to address the problem from the problem's perspective. We can address everything from a positive perspective. When I was raising Black boys, they had no clue what was happening in the world of Black boys. I raised them to be empowered and strong and smart and all of that. And so you start everything on the end in which we're trying to get to. So we don't talk about the negative outcomes. We talk about healthy eating. Yeah. We talk about healthy mental health. What does it look like to be mentally healthy? And so we just flip it. We start on the positive end. We start on the way in the direction that we want to get to. And we address it from that perspective. And then once we do that, then I think the numbers of some of the things that we're seeing in terms of the rise of, negative health outcomes, both physical and mental, we'll start seeing some decreases in that. But we don't need to necessarily address it from the positive end. We can address it from the negative end. We can address it from the positive end. That's my point.
If I could add to my point today, I think there is power in the words that we speak, and sometimes even how we describe, like from a public health standpoint, we write grants and we talk about who we're trying to, why do we need this funding, and we're talking about all the deficits and all the disparities. But why are we not speaking in terms of the outcomes and the goals that we want to achieve? And I think that we can tell the same story, but understanding that we can use empowering words. And I think that if we speak life into things, then life can bloom. And I think sometimes we know what the deficits are, but we don't always know where we want to go. We know that there's racism, but we don't know how to dismantle racism. We know that there's obesity, but we don't know how to create or promote healthy eating. And so sometimes we need to just think about, where are we going? But utilizing our words to not always describe things in a way that always calls somebody oppressed. If I'm coming to a community and I'm telling them that you are a marginalized, oppressed, impoverished community, well, that's not going to make me feel like I want to rise up and do something new and transformative. So if I say that you are a rich community, untapped resources, and unfurthered ground that we can really build great things on, we can do that. But we have to speak life into our communities into the people that we want to have. And there is an empowering approach theory that speaks to that. And you have to say, if you're religious, you can say it in that way. You know, you speak things as though they are. So if I am sick, you do not say you're sick, you say you are well. If I am broke, I say that I am rich. It is that feeling of being able to empower yourself and to see things as not as though they are, as though you want them to be, and calling it to your mind at that moment, even when you don't necessarily know how you're going to get there. And I think that we need to be really mindful as clinicians, as people of power, is that we have a lot of power in our tongue, and how we speak about and to communities, both individually and on the macro level, really can shape how they want to see themselves and how we can actually help them or empower them to want to help themselves. So I think there's power in the tongue, and I just agree so much with what Dr. Wilbon said. I think we just really need to be bridling our tongue, and if we're going to speak in empowerment tones or strength-based tones, and not in tones of already noted things such as the marginalization that people may be suffering with, because that's already known.
Dr. Jones, do you have any input on that?
I agree.
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. As Cheryl Maxwell says to everyone in the chat, let's see, I hold to using the sandwich approach, positive, negative, positive, beginning with a compliment, identification, and discussion of the issues, and ending with a solution. Excellent. Excellent, excellent. Okay, so we've talked a lot about the whole panorama and universe here of Black mental health. So just in your opinion, this is to the whole group, where are the breakdowns in accessing resources, mental health resources? Just clearly, what, I mean, there are resources out there, but what are the key breakdowns and gaps?
So I think that there's probably a lot. I think that people don't know how to access care, number one. Number two, it's not easy to access care, right? You got to have the wherewithal, you got to have the patience, you got to have the time to call around to a bunch of people to find out who it is that has openings, and then do they take your insurance? If they don't take your insurance, how much is it going to cost? Yeah. You know, so I think that just getting into the system is very, very challenging. So I think, to me, that's the biggest issue. And then also, there's not enough people, there's not enough providers, you know, and so you got these long waits for people who are just calling for services when they don't have, they're calling because they need help now. They don't need help 3 months from now or 6 months from now. You know, that's I think one of the bigger issues that we have.
I agree with Dr. Jones. I think that, you know, it's not easily accessible. It's easier for me to order food on Uber Eats than it is for me to get a healthcare professional appointment. And I think we need, maybe not that easy, but we need to make it a little more accessible in that way. Or maybe we do. We need to, like I think Dr. Wilbon said it best, we need to change our marketing strategy. We need to change our access strategy and be more efficient with the times. We're going to a really modern age of way of living. Things are so on demand. I haven't been to a grocery store since way before the pandemic, and I'm not going back. And I just feel that it's easier for me to get groceries than it is for me to set up a doctor's appointment. And that's my health. I only have one body. I eat 3 times a day, but I got one body and one mind. And it's harder for me to get help to get into a doctor's appointment than it is for me to order groceries. And I think we have to think about how to create access in a way that's not going to create another barrier for people. So I think if we start to really think about it in that way, if we start to modernize our systems, if we start to create systems, I think it will aid in some of that reduction in that barrier.
So we have about 3 minutes left. You, our excellent professionals here, have been appointed by the governor as the mental health czar for the state of Maryland. What are the top 3 things you're going to focus on immediately within your first 100 days?
3 things.
within the first one, I did this first 100 days.
Definitely funding, more money, you know, more money. I think the access piece, I think Stephanie is right on target. We need to change the access. You know, if you can create an app and put all the grocery stores together and you can order food from wherever you want and have it delivered, we certainly should be able to tell somebody the top 3 professionals that can help them given whatever it is their particular issues or needs are. And so that to me is an app waiting to happen. And Stephanie, that if you know someone, I'm doing some mental health app development stuff now. I think that it would be a fabulous ideal. And then just I think more training, you know, if we have the funding to help get training for more Blacks and the whole pipeline of starting to educate people at an early age. So I would create a pipeline program for education. I would, you know, get more funding and then create applications to help get access to resources and services.
Dr. Jones?
So I would certainly, I think that fixing the access problem, you have to incentivize people to actually use a resource that connects people to people. I think that, you know, there's no point of having lots of people on a website when nobody's taking patients, right? So I think you have to incent providers to create spaces. I think that we need to completely change the way that we do follow-ups so that people who don't need services are not forced to keep coming back for care, so that a provider can make their bottom line. So I think we need to incent people to move through the process. And then also, I do think that there's a lot of work that has to be done on the measurement-based care so that we can see that people are actually getting better and benefiting from the services that we are paying for. So that's just top 3.
Wonderful. Stephanie?
I ditto. We definitely need resources. I think we definitely need to not only invest in the system having more resources, but being able to pay providers more to sustain them and to incentivize them to have better infrastructure for better data collection, which is my number 2. And so much like we did for somatic during the ACA, we need to do that for behavioral health and increase access so that we can have systems to do the measurement that Dr. Jones said. And I think the third thing is I would look at behavioral health equity. I would really look at it considerably and say, where are the gaps, where are the disparities, where are the deficits, and really target my area in a way that I don't think we are just starting to talk about, but we really need to do some innovative things.
Wonderful. We're at the end of our time. All 3 of you are hired. I heard from the governor. This has been outstanding. To our audience, you've heard from some extremely talented individuals. Dr. Aliya Jones, who is the inaugural Executive Medical Director of Behavioral Health for Luminis Health, which includes Anne Arundel County Medical Center, Dr. Community Medical Center, McNew Family Medical Center, and related community-based services. I know Dr. Jones from working with her here at the Maryland Department of Health. You've also heard from Stephanie Slowly, a strategic leader with over 10 years of supervisory experience in public health and clinical settings, and demonstrate proficiency in producing reliable services to support a large and diverse population of supporting programs impacting a diverse client population, understanding technical challenges through systematic thinking, delivering actionable solutions effectively. And last but not least, and I'm pulling up your bio right now, because this is so important to do. Just give me 1 second here. Boom, right there. Where'd it go? Right there. Here we go. Dr. Wilbon, Rhonda Wilbon of Rhonda Wilbon Consulting LLC, who is a licensed clinical social worker, a certified John Maxwell leadership coach, professor and author. In January 2019, she added financial planning to her extensive list of skills, adding to her experience to her leadership as a holistic wellness life coach. She is the chair and paramount instructor of the Leonard G. Dunstan African-centered Neo-Onim Circle, a year-long study program sponsored by the National Association of Black Social Workers. With those are just partial bios. These are women that are extremely talented and experienced, and we want to thank you so much for being with us. Those of you who are still with us right now. You've heard so much wonderful information around Black mental health, the stigmas, the solutions, how we can engage. Just know from everything that we've heard, we can do this. We can actually make an impact. So let's leave this thinking about what more can we do and to improve on addressing Black mental health. Until next time, we'll see you. Take care. Bye-bye.